Currently, in Ontario, in the year 2017, our education system is facing a crisis. When you have a situation where 1 in 8 Ontario schools are going to close, that type of systemic change is known as education reform. Unfortunately, because of the new PAR guidelines put in place by the Ministry of Education in 2015, the only group that gets a chance to provide input on this version of education reform that's being implemented are senior administrators from regional school boards. While I, for one, would certainly agree that education reform is needed, conducting it with only one group's informed perspective and only one data set on the table, that's not democracy. If I was going to support something as crucial as education reform, I would want to know that big picture impacts on the environment and the economy and the benefit to student academic opportunities had been incorporated into the discussion. Teachers, for one, teachers should have input on the process of education reform. In many cases, particularly when it's a small community and they only have one school, oftentimes the teachers or administrators at the school are the only people that these volunteer parent groups have access to in terms of forming their rebuttal for the school closing. And yet the teachers and principals at the schools can't provide input because if they do, then they face recrimination from their employer, which is the school board. That to me, it creates a climate of fear. And I don't think that a climate of fear is a good climate for any discussion about education reform. Essentially, when the Wynne government and the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, Glenn Murray, rolled out the legislation called the Ontario 5-Year Climate Change Action Plan, essentially what they did was put the onus on reducing carbon emissions onto individuals and private business owners. While I support that initiative and agree that carbon levels need to be reduced, um, they need to start by incorporating those changes into the publicly owned assets like the education system. Until such time as education reform that is mindful of its impact on the environment is on the table, then this process needs to be halted. To me, the fact that we have no big picture emissions projections for the proposed changes to our education system is grounds right there why the process should be halted. In Ontario, we have one of the most important freshwater ecosystems in North America, particularly in rural and northern Ontario. And we can't support any education reform that isn't mindful of its impact on our communities. The current funding model calls for the closure of 2 existing schools before school boards can receive funding to build new schools. So I guess what I'm saying is the funding model needs to change. The PAR process needs to change, and any equitable or democratic version of education reform that's to be implemented in Ontario schools needs to address prioritizing academic opportunity for students, not the budgetary concerns of individual boards. It needs to incorporate elements of environmental impact and also economic impact on small and rural communities. Until such time as those changes occur, I call on you, Education Minister Mitzi Hunter. I call on you, Minister of Environment Glenn Murray, and I call on you, Premier Kathleen Wynne, to put a stop to this process. Hold off on any more rural school closures in Ontario, and let's have a conversation about education reform, incorporating more than just financials, but the things that really matter to Ontario. This has been Heather Dirks, fighting for change in my province and as well as in the Thames Valley District School Board. If you are fighting a school closure in your school district, don't give up. Share this video. We can make a change. Thank you.